So we're going to ask you, a series of questions. The first are going to be, more conversational. Then we'll actually do some activities using the laptop as well, so you can initiate some scenarios.
Awesome.
Okay. So to get started, first question is, talk to us a little bit about, what you were doing before Europe, how'd you hear about us, and why you decided to join the program.
Certainly. I'll keep it with recent history. So before I was working at Europe, I was kind of meandering from job to job. They were all entry-level positions, and I performed well within them, but I had come to a point where I felt like I was wasting my potential, frankly speaking. There wasn't a whole lot of upward mobility with these jobs, and I didn't feel like I was doing purposeful work. So this is kind of the case that my life was going on for the better part of 3 years. And then I was lucky enough to hear from my mother, who was childhood friends with one of the Europe staff, and she kind of told me about the program. And my mother knew my position very well, and she knew kind of what my anxieties were about that time in terms of where my direction was going and things of that nature. So she came to me talking about Europe and said, they're having this informational session. This is the website. Why don't you just go and give it a look? It couldn't hurt to try. And I did. I ended up going to Europe's website, and I went to one of the informational sessions that SO was hosting right in there in Daly City. I was very impressed. And so that's kind of how I heard about it. The thing that actually sold me on making the full decision to commit myself to Europe fully was that I was lucky enough to attend one of the graduation sessions. It was the one that happened, I think, just with this last cycle. And I saw the way that they were handling the ceremony, and I saw people walking across the stage, and I was completely sold at that point. So that's how I found out about Europe, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And, of course, Europe is a tech program, right? So my question to you is, why do you want to work in tech?
Yeah, absolutely. I will do my best to try to answer this concisely, because it's kind of a big reason. In my opinion, and when I look at the world we live in, I feel like it's kind of impossible not to work in tech. And what I mean by that is that at this day and age, and at this epoch of human history, technology is in every single thing we do. So in some respect, by some extent or another, regardless of what work position or workplace you're in, or what field of practice you decide to get engaged with, you are working in tech. In terms of why I want to work in it specifically, directly involved with it, frankly speaking, I'm fascinated with it. I would very much like to be able to kind of get into the guts and sinew of the technologies that are forming the basis of the world we're in and actually understand them. I'm a very curious guy. There's a lot that interests me. And to be able to have a part in what that looks like beneath the surface, it satisfies my interests. And I feel like if you're working in the capacity of something that's kind of that integral to the way we're living our lives these days, you have the power and you have the knowledge to make pretty big differences in people's lives. I mean, take, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, right? I mean, it's kind of an easy example to call upon, but seriously, even aside from just having made Facebook, which has been very successful for him, he's now able to use it as a platform to make very huge changes in the world that he wants to make. He engages in so much different philanthropy, and every little action that he takes with the platform, Facebook, has such far-reaching implications around the world. I would like to be able to get a little slice of that and make changes in that same way. To kind of tie it all in together, I want to be a part of it, and I want to be a very conscious and engaged part of it, rather than just kind of working on the sideline.
So I'm going to stick with this question just
Sure.
a little bit. You gave the example of Mark Zuckerberg and the philanthropic efforts and contributions that he's making. You said, I would like to do something similar. Could you give me an example of what that would be?
Sure. In terms of, like, where I see myself doing it, or what his... Okay, sure.
No, this is about you.
This is another one of those things that I have to tie myself down to, because I can go so far with it. But one of my biggest interests in life, and I promise I'll make this relevant, one of my biggest interests in life is philosophy, which is to say the way we human beings live our lives, different perspectives, different helpful ways to go about being the best kind of human being that you can be. I feel like ideas are a very powerful thing. And technology, and specifically the advent of the internet and having some kind of big slice of the internet, is a very good way to get your ideas around. If I was as successful in my career as I wanted to be, and if I was as deeply steeped in technology as I wanted to be, I would want to be able to share ideas about how to live to the best of your ability and how to become the best possible version of yourself and to make the impact that you want to make in your own lives. And I kind of feel like, honestly, that ties in a lot with the opportunity divide that Europe is trying to close. I mean, consider the exact kind of person that this program is targeting and trying to bring in. often enough it's the case that people can't take advantage of opportunities because they don't even know they exist in the first place. I feel like if you can make ideas proliferate, you can make massive changes in the world. So what that would look like for me is communicating with people who were in maybe underdeveloped communities, or people who didn't have access to those opportunities, or didn't even know that they existed in the first place. And I feel like that is the closest way I can come to my calling and actually make the changes that I want to see in the world. If you regard, for example, the influence that a president has over a given country, it's a pretty important position. An executive position, you can veto bills, you can have a big influence on laws that are passed, but it's a very kind of indirect, trickle-down, nebulous thing. It's, in my opinion, it doesn't have the same kind of potency that you might find with a teacher, for example, who can really influence a person's mind and their life and their spirit and kind of ordain the way they're going forward in their future. So to bring that all back to me, because I know I've kind of gone in a lot of directions here, if I can make the kind of ideas proliferate that empower people, that would be big for me. And so you talked about, what that would look like. For me, it's trying as best I can to get in touch with people who don't have the information that they need to make their lives what they want them to be, and giving them that information and empowering them with those tools.
Okay. So thinking of your 4 months here in learning and development, what has been your biggest challenge or your growth area, right? What have you done to overcome this challenge? And what specifically will you do to plan ahead to ensure you are set up for success on your internship in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the outset of program, at the outset of learning and development, my biggest challenge was by and large organization. And that means both, my ability to execute tasks in a timely fashion, the way I organized my time, whether or not I was writing in a planner at even a point. That's always been a point of weakness for me before I came into the program. I'm very happy to say that that's changed in a big way since I've started with Europe. So for example, when I first came in here, I wasn't writing a whole lot down. I didn't have any calendar that I used from day to day to kind of ordain the way I was using my actions. Now I do have a planner. I write down it every day. I write down everything, all my assignments, things of that nature. I do use my Outlook calendar. It's a way I help organize not just my time from day to day, but it's how I help myself remember what's coming up and things like that. So that was definitely a big point of weakness for me in the past, and I've already converted on it in some pretty big ways so far. In terms of what I intend to do in the future to kind of continue on that path of growth, I can think of two main things. One is borrowing from the knowledge of other people who do that skill a lot better than I do, and I've already been lucky enough to meet a lot of those kinds of people who are willing to support me and are willing to kind of offer me that kind of advice and assistance. And so a big part of what I'll be doing in the future is just learning from them and taking in information that way. And the second part, honestly, is just continuing to discipline myself with it so that organization becomes for me and not just a measure of effort, which it is right now, and fortunately enough, I'm making a good effort and it's been working well for me, but a measure of habit so that it becomes automatic. And so instead of me saying, it's a place where I'm growing, I can say I'm an extremely organized person all the time. So I hope that sufficiently answers the question.
So you had a chance prior to the interview to look at a few of the different job descriptions that were aligned by track. Could you let us know which one most interested you and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So after I looked at all of them, junior project coordinator was most interesting to me. There are a lot of reasons, but it had a lot to do with the summary qualifications that were listed there, what they expected of us. One of the big ones was communication. I like to think that I'm a good communicator. It's something I've been practicing for a very long time. And because, they listed impeccable communication skills as one of the things they were looking for most directly, that's definitely something I wanted to capitalize on. I wanted to do something where I feel natural working in that way. Another skill that was listed in junior project coordinator was the ability to problem solve. It's basically a hobby for me. I enjoy looking at difficult or sometimes complex tasks and picking them apart and trying to unpack them in a way that makes sense of them and going forward. I spend a lot of my time playing chess, playing puzzle games, things of that nature. So again, this is another instance in which this is very natural stuff for me, and I feel like we work best when we're working in a way that comes naturally to us. I've also had a lot of leadership experience, and a lot of experience kind of synthesizing the complexities of tasks for people so it can be a bit more simple for them. And that was another of the qualifications that were looked for under junior project coordinator, the ability to, what was the exact verbiage they used? It's not coming to me at this point, but basically organizing other people and making sure that everybody involved in a given project is kind of mobilized in the same direction. That's something I've had experience doing. I actually have a resume here if you'd be interested in seeing it, but one thing that you would find is that I used to be the team leader of my mock trial team back when in high school. After that, I taught students, and this was fresh out of high school, I taught a after-school group of middle school students. These were both things that required a lot of organization, a lot of lesson planning in my case, a lot of ability to get a lot of different people, a lot of different moving parts going and working all in kind of one cohesive unit. So that's also something that I've had enough experience with to be versed in. And quite frankly, aside from my being good at these things, or I like to think good at these things, they're fun for me. So when I looked at all the abilities, or excuse me, all of the tasks that were listed there, all of the different tracks, that was the one that seemed like it was not only natural for me, but something I could see myself deeply enjoying doing. That's why I landed on junior project coordinator.
Thank you.
Thank you. So for this next question, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and it's going to be a scenario-based question,
Okay.
where essentially I'll ask you, I'll frame for you a scenario, and you kind of walk me through how you would handle this task. Okay. Let me see here. Which one? So, let's see here. I see you have Excel listed on your resume, right? Okay. What have you done with Excel? What do you know how to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kind of forego going over every single formula we learned because there is a whole host of things to do. But we've, here in Europe, worked with a lot of Excel, usually for the organization and manipulation of data. So I'm proficient enough in Excel to kind of get any grouping of data of any real size and plug in the correct formulas to make the data basically do anything I need to do. So if, for example, we were trying to find the percentile amount of growth in revenue that we need to, I guess, break even on a plateau we're trying to reach by the end of the year. I'm familiar with not a program, but I'm familiar with a function, I believe it's called GoalSeek, if I'm not mistaken, where you can identify a grouping of cells, and you can plug in what amount you're trying to reach, and you can plug in conditions for it, and then that will populate the correct numbers you need to kind of get to that point. So there's a lot of kind of investigative abilities in Excel that I'm able to use in that way. There are also a lot of different formulas just for organizational purposes, and I shouldn't even call them formulas, but if, for example, I need to make two different spreadsheets happen within the same kind of document, say it's one workbook, that would just be a matter of opening up separate tabs and having those both organized in that way. So yeah, that's kind of the scope of my knowledge with Excel so far. Basically, just making sure that the data is manipulated in whatever it needs to be, and that's organized properly.
Okay, thank you.
So, talk to me about a time where you did some group work.
Mm-hmm.
And in working in that team, how did you decide to divide up that work? Which role did you take? Why? What would you do differently?
Sure. So the one I'd like to talk about is a project that we had here in Europe pretty recently, at which we were supposed to identify a Kickstarter campaign and try to garner support for it, or attention for it, financial support, all that. Our task at the time was to try to make this product called the Umbrella look as attractive as possible. It was this smart umbrella in essence, and I'll get to why I'm bringing it up in a moment. In terms of how we divvy up the work and how we distribute the tasks, it became a measure of stepping back from the product for a moment and just having a conversation amongst ourselves as to what we all felt most comfortable doing, and how we wanted to organize our efforts so that we can meet the deadlines that were set before us. And that was a pretty smooth conversation to be a part of and to facilitate. I feel lucky enough that I had group members that kind of knew where they wanted to fit into maybe the kind of work that they were best suited for. But in terms of how we organized ourselves, it was just a matter of communicating. What would you like to do in this instance? What do you feel most comfortable working with? Where do your skill sets lie? So there's a lot of just making sure that we are all on the same page and then moving forward that way. In terms of what I could do differently with the project, we did end up performing very well on it. We all got a very good grade. We had a lot of fun doing the project. If I were to look for anything that we could have done better, I think it would have just been the presentation of the data. I like to think it looked very good, but as with almost any project, it could have stood to use a little more polish. But if I'm being entirely honest, there wasn't a whole lot there that I feel like we didn't have. There wasn't a whole lot there that we didn't have our I's dotted on or our T's crossed on. So yeah, that's kind of how that went.
Okay. And for the last, I'm just going to